All right, chapter 4, second part, second half. Page 21 in the book. And I don't know where that is in the digital. It's about halfway through. 2.5 pages, 5 pages total. They just offered water. The expression on almost everyone's face changed. The two friends had hardly gotten home when Scott showed up with a red wagon that had 2 5-gallon buckets on it. He also had some electrical tools and offered to help wire the pump. "Hey, Scott," Mark said, "did the engineer tell you anything about what caused the EMP?" "He just said that it was most likely from nukes being detonated in space, but he also said it could have come from the sun or even from space outside our solar system. If it was nukes, who launched them?" I asked the same question, but he didn't have a clue. Scott said, Mark wondered if they would ever know the truth. Scott said they could pull the 220-volt receptacle off of the generator and wire it directly to the pump. But Mark told him he wanted to be able to easily move the generator around. Scott asked him if he had any 220-volt plugs around. Mark didn't, and the only one he knew of was on the clothes dryer. After making him promise over and over to buy a new plug as soon as possible, Jess reluctantly agreed to let them cut the plug off of the dryer. 10 minutes later, it was spliced onto the pump, and when Mark pulled the starter cord the second time, the generator roared to life. They let it warm up for a moment and then plugged in the pump. The pressure gauge began to rise, and Mark felt the same way he had when the Jeep started. By this time, there were almost 35 people at Mark's house, with everything from 2-liter soda bottles to a huge wheelbarrow with a Visqueen lighter in it. Everyone thanked Mark profusely, and some even offered to pay. Mark thanked them, but declined, saying it was only the neighborly thing to do. After a while, when some were showing up for their 3rd or 4th trip and others who had just gotten the word were showing up for the first time, Mark put Samantha and David in charge of the hose with strict orders not to accept any money. Then he went back to setting up the camper. When he got to the back, Jim's pop-up was all set up, and Jim was standing next to Mark's charcoal barbecue pit cooking burgers. "Man, that smells good," Mark said, realizing he hadn't eaten anything since breakfast. "They do, don't they?" Jim said. Mark leveled the camper, opened all the windows and vents, and turned on the refrigerator and the hot water heater. The camper ready, he helped Jim finish the burgers. When they were done and all of the water borrowers had gotten what they needed, the two families sat down at the picnic table on the deck to eat. Mark said grace and asked for the Lord to protect them and give them wisdom in the midst of the crisis. Jess had only bought 1 package of buns, which was usually more than enough for 4, so anyone who ate a second burger had to eat it on plain white bread. When Mark and Jim were on their second burger and David was on his 3rd, a small older lady came around the corner of the house with an empty half-gallon milk jug in her hand. "Excuse me, but are you the ones giving away the water?" "Yes, ma'am," Mark said as he stood up. "Could I bother you for some?" "It's no bother, but don't you need more than just a half a gallon?" "I could use more, but this was the only clean container I had," she explained. Mark walked over to the woman. "Hi, my name's Mark Turner." "Hello, I'm Abigail Peterson," she said as she extended her hand to Mark. "It's nice to meet you," Mark said as he shook her hand. "I have several 5-gallon jugs already full. Would you like to borrow one?" "I would never be able to carry that much," the woman, who looked to be around 70, answered. "Mrs. Peterson, that's why God put teenagers on the earth, just so we adults don't have to carry the heavy stuff." "David?" Mark called. "Yes, Dad," David answered, with his mouth half full of hamburger. "Go to the shed and get the water jug with the spigot on it and take it over to Mrs. Peterson's house." "Yes, sir," the boy answered, swallowing the last bite of his burger and running toward the shed. "He doesn't have to do that," Mrs. Peterson objected. "Mrs. Peterson, the boy just ate half a cow. You're doing him a favor by letting him get some exercise." A moment later, David appeared with a wagon with the water jug in it. Mrs. Peterson thanked Mark, then she and Mark started out to her house. In just a few minutes, David was back with a Risk board game in the wagon. "Where did you get that?" his mother asked. "Mrs. Peterson gave it to me. She said that she used to play it with her grandchildren, but they're all grown up now," David said. "I thought I told you not to take anything for the water," Mark chastised. "You said not to take any money." "Is that what I said?" "It is, Dad." Samantha came to the defense of her brother, which was something that didn't happen often. "Well, okay then, but I think you should consider it a loan, not a gift." "Okay, Dad." Man, you should have seen the den in her house. It was full of animal heads. Most were from Africa. But she had some of the biggest white-tailed deer I've ever seen. She told me her husband was quite a big-time hunter, but he died about 2 years ago. Her house was so cool. "I'm glad you liked it because you're probably going to be hauling water over there on a regular basis until the power comes back on," Mark told his son. Mark looked at his watch. The curfew took effect in 4 minutes. Mark and Jim moved the generator to where they could plug both campers into it. They cranked it up, turned on the AC units in the RVs, and then ran an extension cord from it to the deep freeze. Jess, with Lisa's help, moved as much of the contents of the refrigerator in the house to the ones in the campers as best they could, but there were some things that wouldn't fit. Mark got his large ice chest and put 4 of his ice bottles in it. He had found that if he took a 2-liter plastic soda bottle and filled it full of water and then put it in the freezer, it would freeze at colder than 32 degrees, since the pressure caused by the expanding water would lower the freezing point. He wasn't sure how cold they actually got, but he found on his fishing trips to the coast that they would last a long time. He then placed the remainder of the food from the refrigerator in the ice chest. With all of the work that had to be done finished and all of the children occupied, the 4 adults sat down at the picnic table and discussed the events of the day. They spoke mostly of what Scott Simmons had told the men. Jess and Lisa felt that although Scott was a nice fellow, he was just a repairman at the power company and he didn't know what he was talking about. After all, why would the vice president lie about how long it was going to take to restore the power? They wondered what the meeting with Todd was about for a while. Then the discussion drifted to how it must have been to have lived before there was electricity. After what seemed like a short while, Mark looked at his watch again. It now read 10:33. He announced that he was going to take a quick shower in the camper and go to bed. Jim said he was going to do the same. The women decided to talk a while longer and said they would round up the kids and come to bed in a little while, and that they'd shut off the generator before they did. Before he headed to the camper, Mark went into his bedroom with a flashlight and found the black box on his dresser. He pulled 2 $1 bills out of his wallet and put them in the box. After his shower, Mark wound up and set the alarm clock that stayed in the camper and climbed up into the bed. The last thing he remembered thinking was that so much had happened in the last 14 hours. Lights out. They're going to find what it's like to live before electricity.